Be able to now. We have the final presentation of the evening. With some amazing presentations we've had already. I hope everybody enjoying themselves. I want to introduce Jared Murphy. He's a self-experimenter and field researcher of ancient technologies and lost history. He has traveled the world searching for evidence of advanced ancestors and high technology. And he is the author of the book, It's Not Aliens, Worse, It's Us. Jared, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. It's so great to be here tonight. This is exciting. This is going to be really fun.
Yes, it has been fun so far, and it's been a very long day, but I'm so much looking forward to your presentation because you have mind-blowing information every time you come on, and I sometimes I lay up at night thinking about our conversation for hours because it's just like it's very intriguing stuff. And I can't wait to get into this. I'm sure the audience is going to love this. So it's already 6. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you. I'm going to turn my camera off.
All right.
And ladies and gentlemen, Jared Murphy.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Wait, should I pause or are we good to go?
You're good to go.
All right. So this is great. What's really fun about this is that this is the first time I'm making a real presentation in the sense that I've done a conference before, and this is a chance for all of you, for all the times that maybe you've heard me speak. We are going to go through a slide-by-slide presentation of just, first off, quite a bit, but it's just some of the information that really lets us know that there was an ancient advanced human race on the planet. We talk about those evidences, and we talk, there have been so many interviews, and not just interviews, really what we have to look at when you listen to Forbidden Knowledge News or the shows that I'm on, these are informative, definitely rabbit holes that every self-experimenter out there can go and run with, whether it's Wim Hof and superhuman abilities that are being rediscovered that you can try, to just our history. We all have weird hunches, or they might be really genetic memories or paranormal. And this is going to be the first time that I'm going to be presenting to you a slide presentation that's going to really show how do we get to the idea that the UFOs, little green men, or perhaps the people that you see that are little translucently kind of grayish white, big eyes, are they really just advanced humans that have modified their bodies to work with technology that has been always in the making? So you've heard me talk about before paleoanthropological evidence of millions of years of human history, that there was anatomically correct humans here that predate the timeline that we're given. That's not my opinion. Those are just a scientific fact. And it was really in the 1800s and prior to Darwin that Aeolus and Neoliths, very crude and elementary rock tools, like an Aeolith, was found and distinguished to be, this is the work of man, not just tumbling around in a stream or just accidental, ice sheet removal, that there is indications of humanity being here. And just like today, there's about 150, 160 tribes. We don't even actually know, but they are all over the earth. They are here and they live. If we were to dig them up in 1,000 years, we'd find Aeolus, Neoliths. These people live like they did 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, maybe even a couple million or more. We found anatomically correct humans. And so we look at our last 100 years and we listen all in right now on the internet and on the devices that you're all on currently. And we think, okay, well, the paradigm has always been, there was a bunch of people banging rocks and then maybe aliens helped us. That was an easier jump than it was to say, well, wait, what if we've already achieved a high level of technology and there's a global culture? And not only was there a global culture, there was a very advanced culture that engineered the soil, that engineered buildings, and they lived in a way that not only were they maybe interconnected, but they already manipulated their genes, that they already did this kind of work that allowed us to connect and hear and speak and see each other without the aid of instruments, and or within the soil. Were they using it as a communication tool? Were they using it to do things? And there's so many different indicators for this. We're going to get right into I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get into the photographs. And what we're going to do is only build one segment for all of you to see it. How do we get from ancient advanced engineered soil to global world culture? What are those indicators for that? And it's going to scratch the surface, but it's something that you've all heard me talk about. But even if you've looked at my book, which is in the process of being edited for a second edition, and what's more important is this running dialogue, and maybe even, you know, what you hear live like now. And we'll get right to it. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the presentation for what it really is. And I really appreciate you all joining in. This right here is Terra Preta. And you're looking at someone standing at a section that is clearly showing not just rocks, but pottery shards. Those pottery shards are there because we continuously mistake adaptive dynastic peoples' continued work of a particular or mimicking of a particular site. And we're going to see this as a theme tonight, where there is a technology that was there prior and not as advanced or primitive, if you want to call it, tribes live near advanced peoples. And those people were left alone. And here we are with Terra Preta. It's in Brazil. It's in North Africa. It's in Australia. It's in Central America. It's in Northern South America. I don't specify that enough. And what are we talking about? We're talking about a soil that's like a modern biochar, but Terra Preta is and can be thousands of years old based on testing. It is the richest growing soil on earth. I figured that out when I was paleo, and I was looking for, well, how do I get more nutrients in my vegetables and my fruits, and how do I grow nutrient dense food? Well, Terra Preta is really good at that. And it seems to repair itself and self-replicate, as in, yes, it manages itself to not fall into the disrepair that we require today in crop rotation. It seems to replicate and maintain itself. And that's been researched by a scientist in Kansas. There are many papers on Terra Preta where they try to limit the amount of going into what would be woo-woo or so many interesting characteristics of this soil. So it has piezoelectric properties. So that means it could receive as well as send electromagnetic current in a nutshell. So think of it as like a giant grid on the planet, a blanket, like an electric blanket. Think of it as an electric blanket. The mechanics of an electrical blanket, it has a bunch of wires in it. There's resistance, it causes heat. But think of Terra Preta like an electric blanket in that from one end of the bed to the other, if you laid the blanket out, you could send information anywhere on the blanket. And that's what Terra Preta is. It also filters heavy metals. It filters carbon dioxide. And what's more important, this does not fit the paradigm that we're taught. You can't have this identical soil in North Africa, in Australia, South America, all over South America. The current estimate in Brazil is that it's an area the size of 2 Great Britains or 2 Spains. It's not like there's someone out there, by the way, doing core samples. In some places, it's 12 to 18 feet thick. Some say 20. In other places here, you're looking at someone that's probably 6 feet. But it was built on, added to, and it still exists. And there are other versions of Terra Preta is a Portuguese word for black earth, black soil. But there are other versions of biochars in Europe, like Chernozems. They're also in North America. They're in Central America. They're in Canada. They're in Central Europe. But Chernozems are also packaged out of Ukraine and sold for their richness, for high nutrient content, way beyond ours, not just 17 or 16 that are used in modern growing areas. And this is interesting, but something I have never shared with anyone. What we're going to look at now is, this is the map of the world as it would have been seen. Probably right now, what you're looking at is 55 to 65 plus thousand years ago. Some of it. We're going to look at this global map for a minute. This is something that's on my website. It took a number of my 3.5 years of research. A decent chunk was put into this to have this drawn. for me to research and make it accurate. It is very difficult to find period maps of the world. Now, there's a lot of different lakes. I was particular about doing a couple things. One, the gray area here along the coast, as you know it, would represent the true coastlines. Now, these are always approximations, but I'm going to zoom in to one right away that people have started to hear more of because of articles on sites like Ancient Origins, and we've talked about it extensively, and it's called Doggerland. Doggerland encompasses Scotland and Ireland, and it is a massive amount of land that makes the Baltic look like a very, very, very big, inlet lake, although it is saltwater. But here is in the darker area, the true remnants of what would have been above ground as little as 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. A good portion of the coastline of France and around Great Britain was still connected. And you can see some very accurate maps of the course of Doggerland's digressions. And it's Dogger, Doggerland. And what this represents and what everyone should think about is cities, soil, engineered soil. The story of us is in this missing land. And what's particularly important, and we're going to tie into this right now, is that Doggerland, a good portion of what you see, all of what you see was above water 8,000 plus years ago. And that is within dynastic times. And dynastic times we're talking Egypt. We're talking the dynastic Egyptians, Sumer, the Harappan in India, the what ultimately we're going to call Greeks, but the Etruscans, and then the Romans, the Greeks and the Romans, Malta, where you see Sicily. The Mediterranean was more of a lake. And the reason this map is important is because we tell ourselves in a snapshot of what it's not a fact. We start with a theory of evolution, and we start with a theory of the story we tell ourselves about the lineage of humanity. When it's clear, we have these physical examples of land, even 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, quite a bit of Doggerland was above water. And then at 8,000 years plus, most of it was. And at 15,000 years, 12 to 15,000 years, right around the time Göbekli Tepe and the other tepes were definitely being used. That's over 12,000 years for sure. That doesn't get spoken about enough, but we're not going to focus on that right now. We're going to go from Doggerland to Cuba. This is the origin and why I made this map. In Cuba, off the west coast, you have a very interesting city that was found. The only way that city would have been above water was over 55-ish plus around 1,000 years ago. Now, there was a massive volcanic eruption. The estimation is approximately 75,000 years, but it would not be hard to say that it happened 60,000 years ago or 80,000 years ago. We don't know. I mean, we have some geological evidence for it. It's being pinned around 75, and the Younger Dryas is an event between 12 or 11 and a half and 13,000 years ago. And again, look at this. It looks more like a lake. And you'll notice that in North America, the Great Lakes are still here. They were large enough. Salt Lake, as in Salt Lake City, Utah, still shows up. And I'm sure everyone watching, besides looking at how different and dramatic the land masses are, and I'm not going to talk about Greenland or the Arctic right now, but you'll notice that the lakes, these are real lakes like Lake Victoria and Lake Chad. There are lakes that were huge in North Africa. There is new data and evidence that shows that North Africa was green and tropical even as early as 6,000 years ago. For everyone who's theorizing that, everything happened in the last maybe 6 to 10,000 years, there is an audience for that. It's unlikely. And because we have that city that's off the coast of Cuba on our left, that city wasn't built for it to go underwater. So we are looking at the earth, that city, which has pyramid structures, polygonal masonry, and we have that engineered soil that's all over the earth that we're going to get back to. But that pyramidal type city off the coast of Cuba had these shorelines to contend with. These shorelines would have been what they would have been looking at 55,000 plus years ago. We have an anatomically correct human race. We have stories from Egyptians of the Nile running east-west. And not only that, we have satellite imaging now of ancient, lost, dried riverbeds in North Africa. But again, at 50,000 plus years ago, this is closer when you pull all the geological maps together. I'm not saying this is complete, but this is here to illustrate a point for us to get our head around it. And there were stories that the Greeks heard about the Nile running east-west, and that here we are running right near the Recot structure, in a sense, which was credited to be where Atlantis is we have these very large lake systems. And what's, to give people scale, I do want to point something out over here in Asia. Lake Baikal, that banana in the center of the screen is a lake that represents 22 to 27%, depending on which map you're looking at in the world, or which theory you're looking at. It represents 22 to 27% of the world's fresh water, this one lake. So if everything goes to crap and you think that maybe Siberia-ish might be the place to go, Lake Baikal is incredibly deep, incredibly ancient, and there's almost a quarter of the world's water. Maybe a little more, maybe just slightly under, but a quarter of the world's fresh water that we know of is right here in this lake. Now, as far as the continent of Australia and New Zealandia, we're just going to zoom in. And here we have, again, for the first time, and I'm taking my time with this because I do want people to absorb a little bit about what they're looking at. New Zealandia, New Zealand, of course, is there in that sliver. And then New Zealandia, up to 250 million years ago, was this big. And for all those wondering, between Australia, Madagascar, and the southern tip of India, that's Lemuria, possibly. That is the utmost of all the things I drew into this map. I will point out that there have been dramatic continental shifts up, down, and I'm not just referring to Pangaea and the disbursement of the continental items that are here, as far as like how everything was one giant world that broke up and all the land masses separated. This mass is the most suspect, but the areas around Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, those are all exactly where they should be. And this would have been something that easily, these islands from the Solomons to the right in the east, this is the world map as we would have not conceived of it. And yet it more truly represents the coastline. So what have we lost? Well, people live on the coast. And not just primitive people, but advanced people. And we have many, 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 many ruins, like off the coast of India, like Graham Hancock dived in the 90s. And now you're looking at a more accurate element showing where people lived. And we had engineered soil. So here we are. Next map. This is why we're going slow, because this is going to accelerate. It's going to go really fast. So it's important for us to see what we're looking at, which is an overlay of Chernozems and Terra Preta. That means that in these highlighted areas, we're looking at where engineered soil would be located that we know of currently. It starts to tell a different story when you look at Doggerland, and I'm going to call it nanoarchaeology, but there is sedimentary evidence right now coming from saltwater of the flora and fauna of Doggerland. They're actually starting to investigate that. It's accepted in the mainstream, so it's acceptable to research. But we're looking at where a global civilization not only may be located, but might be areas that they're connecting. We're going to show this in the constructions that they have. So what's the next one? This is the same map, but the location of Terra Preta in an initial look with an overlap in red of stone spheres. Now, stone spheres were first found in Costa Rica. Why is this important? If you overlap the true world map in an era that polygonal construction is found off the coast of Cuba and off the coast of India, and if you mix it with where we know of engineered or biochars that are ancient, we start to tell ourselves now with the new map a different story. So here we go. Here's a stone sphere in China. Normally we would start with polygonal masonry. We're not. These stone spheres come in all sizes. We're going to go over these and we're going to talk about the science, and then we're going to get back to that world map and we're going to tie this world society together. So this is China. This is Costa Rica. And this is very big. You're looking at one that was found as they were planting banana plantations. These are found in the ground. They're not found above the ground. Miss Stone there in the pit, literally her last name was Stone. And here's 2 stone spheres being found with other objects that they don't know what they are. They're finding them in situ, they're taking photos. And ironically, if you can believe this, in the 1940s, and there was one other attempt in the 50s, but these have never been investigated outside of those times. In fact, they've only recently become an international heritage item, World Heritage thing. And so now they're protected, but they weren't. I mean, they're used to decorate lawns. They were found in LA when they were excavating a hillside. They said they were dinosaur eggs. David Hatcher Childress is famous for talking about stone balls. And here we are with them, not just in Costa Rica, not just like the one in China, but here is one in Bosnia. And look how it started to fade. This one's one of the biggest ever found. They estimate this one to be 64 tons. And what's going to be more mind-blowing is the simplistic explanation is that I wonder if you could I wanted to zoom in so you can see kind of like how it's been aging. Like the original surface material is falling apart. But the purpose that's been described by modern archaeologists is that this was done in order to help chiefs go into the afterlife, and that if you're a very important person, they would bury you with a stone sphere. They come up with very primitive explanations because that's what's in your head. And so apply that to the landmass, apply that to their then interpretations of culture. If you start with the very landmass and say, well, this is what the world looked like, and this is how they were all separated. So what are these people that we keep giving all these abilities or attributes? What is it that they can and cannot do within the spectrum of those possibilities? And it really gets limited and primitive, even in the explanation. So here we are in Bosnia, not too far. I think this one's near the Bosnian pyramid. But this sphere, 64 tons, isn't a lot different. There's been almost no materials science research on this. Originally, they were called concretions. So that for a period of time, apparently volcanoes got in the habit of rolling like a giant snowball down like an avalanche. It started with a small ball, and then during eruptions in the air, they just geologically rolled in the air, and then all over the earth for a short period of time, volcanoes just made these natural concretions. Now, there are natural concretions on Earth. These are not natural concretions. They're hollow, they appear cast, they have multiple layers. There's a number of fun things about them, but the picture we're looking at right now is in Australia. Now, all over the world, this is the example I'm showing you right now. All over the world, the stories went that these had gold or treasure or something magical in them. So what happened was people started breaking into them by blowing them up, busting them up. I mean, just doing whatever they could do to get inside these stone spheres, whether it's Mexico, they're in Mexico, whether they're in Costa Rica, Central America, a little further down the line. And remember, I've talked a lot about the LiDAR scans and the massive amount of civilization in Guatemala, but these stone spheres, we started in China. We've looked at a few places. What's crazy about this is They did not have any treasure in them, but they did prove out to be hollow. And then one of the other things that used to be pointed out for a long time by alternative research is, well, along with polygonal masonry, why are they so perfectly round? And then later somebody pointed out, well, they're not perfectly round, that some of them do seem to have some variations, or they're egg-shaped. What hasn't really occurred to anyone is that if you're an ancient high-tech civilization, which we're going to get to, if you were working with eigenvalues, which is like pi, they're very good for eigenvalues. So if you're dealing with waves and frequencies and energy, you know all about, or like a spherical math, like a system that they found in the YBC tablet of ancient Sumer, and also the Babylonian Plimpton tablet, the Pythagorean theorem, and all of that science found in Sumer way prior to Pythagoras. All of it has to do with waves and frequencies. So we already know this woman, this is Costa Rica. They're likely standing on some sort of an ancient engineered soil that's been neglected or forgotten or thought was natural. And here's a stone sphere, and it's a giant stone sphere. But they also come as small as golf balls. Here we are in the Arctic. This is north. So the North Arctic, this is near Russia. This one's a little bit smaller than the one that you just saw with her in it. And here's just a variety of sizes of stone spheres. They literally use them as art decorations, which is just crazy. These need to be investigated by our 6 degrees of separation, by anyone you know that knows anyone that is interested in ancient materials sciences. And we need to investigate what the materials are that built these. How many are hollow? Are they hollow? And here's the mind-blowing reason. Right before my book came out in 2019, there was a group of researchers that have been investigating a number of things. One, they found that Greco-Roman amphitheaters had pylons that looked like they were earthquake muting. It had already been investigated that polygonal masonry, which usually people start with, the big crazy polygonal blocks, and we're going to show lots of pictures of that soon. Here, the reason we're starting with stone spheres is, I know you guys can see the screen and you can read it, but I'm going to go over it. This is not to scale. It represents a seismic wave shield consisting of a periodic array of split ball resonators placed underneath the foundations of large civil infrastructure. So such inertial resonators shield wavelengths much larger than their typical size, thanks to low frequency stop bands associated with local resonance. Let me unpack that for you. I've been talking about this for a really long time. Here's your chance to actually see it. Stone spheres, not usually to any particular size, have, or larger than their typical size, thanks to low frequency. In other words, if you can figure out in the ground how many miles down, how many miles over, you have two, in theory, tectonic plates shifting, rubbing, lapping, thrusting, going up. That's all the theories of earthquakes. Currently, we've had that theory for a long time. Here we are with stone spheres, just some of the ones that are all over the earth, including found in America and likely underwater in that massive map that we now have that show cities that were above water over 60,000 years ago. Here we have an example of what inertial resonators would do. They would shield this entire city complex from earthquakes, but also local resonances. So we're referring to not just earthquakes, but we have an engineered soil. It has piezoelectric properties. So if you had a hollow concretion that you formed to not only block earthquakes, but to mute, resonate, or amplify particular fields, there is a whole new archaeology that has not been explored in reference to seismic metastructures. What that means is the very blue that you're looking at of this city, the soil itself isn't just for growing food. The soil outside of the structures themselves, irrelevant to the specific, when we build something, and I have 20 years in remodeling and construction and doing this kind of work, but when you look at each of those buildings and the conversation would be, well, you got to build a footing and a foundation for each of those structures. Well, true. But what these researchers have also found is that if you set up and you sift the soil and you plant trees, like take giant redwoods from a forest that doesn't look like, even if you have a 100-foot tree that's a couple, 2 or 3 feet wide, imagine sequoias and redwoods like Hyperion that are 60 feet in diameter, but planning their construction so that you have a city that also creates above ground zones, safety zones, parks, areas where no ground or aired frequency is going to shatter or move the buildings or the constructions. But here we are with their experiment with, basically they used 1 by 1, 3 by 3 meter stone concretions that they created. And they had some very interesting effects. The whole point is to not make those buildings wave and move. So right now, seismic metastructures could be the size of a grain of sand. They could be the size of a giant stone sphere. And you would end up causing a building to not become wiggly, exactly like in this description in this picture. So now here's some mind-bending stuff, depending on how you sift the soil, as in set the soil itself, not just the direct foundation under the supporting the direct building, but the entire, as you're seeing in the description here, building under seismic disturbance and an inertial interaction represented as a secondary seismic source. In other words, not only are you sending and receiving signals that are intentional, but depending on what unintentional signals determine the wiggle and wobble of the building, well, you have to account for all of that. So different size wave shielding or resonators, like these stone spheres, different sizes would matter depending on where they're placed in the ground, like in that last photo, and the one we were looking at with all the balls under the city. And here we are with a building getting all wiggly. Here is their measurements and diagrams of what happens when you cut up a stone sphere, hold it together. This is getting pretty specific for everyone out there. For those of you who want to get into it, it's the structure of the wave propagation, as in, so there's incoming waves, outgoing waves, how you build the sphere itself. In this case, it's figure 3. It's for 8 pieces connected together and to concrete. So this is part of their specific tests. But we already saw ancient stone spheres. That's why they're there. That's what they do. Granted, it's my theory. Here we go. We're looking at eigenvalues on the left. We're looking at the stresses in color on the stone spheres that they used for testing. These are not the ancient ones, but this is, you can see the stresses. Now, we saw the hollow centers. So there's a lot of value in deciding, do these stone spheres, based on their egg shapes, their not perfect roundness, what was their original material? Remember, all these buildings, something that I'll mention now, this is part of that, I'm sorry, overwhelming, dump a lot of knowledge on you in 2 hours, but all of it you can get back into. But here we have an assumption that, oh, they're really good with working with stone, and oh, they're really good with building with polygonal shapes. Well, there's a lot of technologies that go along with that. It's not about just being able to cut and agitate and move and almost liquefy and marshmallow block, polygonal blocks. In order to have the instrumentation necessary, this is a very advanced society, to measure and to calculate those kind of eigenvalues, to establish the stresses that are going to be affected or muted or enhanced with that stone sphere, requires a significant level of technology. Just look at the graph here on your right. And so now we're going to move on. Again, same stress points. It's even directional within the stone sphere, how the resistance, and we could really get into the particulars, but I want to get back to this map of the earth. So in red again are stone spheres, found locations, not 1, not 2, by the way, Italy, Malta, the Arctic, you can see way up at the top of the screen. You are looking at, by the way, let's focus in on this. This one's a neat one. Easter Island. So you can see 2 things on the map since I zoomed in. Sorry for the delay. You have Costa Rica up there in Central America, big red dot, lots of stone spheres, uncountable number. There's Easter Island. Crazy thing about Easter Island. The holiest thing on the site are not the giant moai, which a common theme that we're going to revisit now. we're already looking at a map that shows the Earth 55 to 70,000 years ago, right? And longer. Here's Easter Island with two things: polygonal masonry, which we're going to look at soon, and the holiest, most sacred thing on this island, to the best of my knowledge, is a stone sphere. The old high-tech items are readapted for dynastic use. So for sure, post-Younger Dryas. Prior to the Younger Dryas, we've assumed that there's been an advanced human population here prior to the Younger Dryas, and that eventually the dynastic Egyptians and Sumer, they kind of just, they came in on the rubble and the ruins, and they took over the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Harappan, all of them, and megalithic Japan. All of it just kind of happened after Younger Dryas. But we're not taking into account is that clearly based on what's off the coast of Cuba, where that red dot is off of Cuba, that there was a society here definitely pre-Younger Dryas, and for sure in that 60,000 plus range. And we also have paleoanthropological evidence of anatomically correct humans going back millions of years. But we have to drop the theory. It's not that we can't table a theory that humans lineally progressed and we were all one society. Well, the problem is we are piecing together a giant game of archaeological and historical and genetic clue. What we have here is evidence of stone spheres that are very similar in their wave resonating abilities all over the earth. We have engineered soil in blue dots here that are all over the earth, not to mention the fact that if we're just beginning scientific research of sedimentary, salt-watered, been under the water for thousands of years off of the coast of Doggerland to identify flora and fauna from 12 to 18,000 years ago, and even 6,000 years ago, or 4,000 years ago, we have to understand that in all the dark gray area here, we have to look for not only ancient engineered soil, but in deserts like North Africa. There's a reason I don't have the lakes and the rivers. Here is a way for us to look at it and go, well, we know that maybe even 6 or 8,000 years ago, North Africa was more tropical. So how much sand do we have to move? Is it 60 feet, 80 feet on some dunes? Is it just 10 or 20 feet in others? In the sedimentary remains, can we find the evidence of this engineered soil or a version of it? It doesn't matter which one, it just matters we have to find a version of it. And same thing, everywhere we find a stone sphere, now we have a number of things. We're seeing similar items all over the earth. This is not an independent world. This is an interesting view of the pyramid because it looks four-sided. What rarely gets, although everyone's giving it airtime, the pyramid is actually 8-sided. It has indentations on each side, at least Menkaure and the Great Pyramid. And here's a better view. It took a RAF pilot flying when the sun was setting. This is not photoshopped. This is the star shape of I'm going to put it to you this way. If you're an ancient advanced human society that can use the very piezoelectric properties of the earth itself on local waves and frequencies and resonance, you can plan cities, constructions, buildings to connect with your entire global network. And we started with a picture of black soil, but this also relates to any kind of soil. It could be soil that looks like sand, like we have white sand for sandboxes for kids, or there's a particular sand that we use to mix with concrete. There's a lot of sand we could use, but we choose to use different sands and different what we think of as a natural product for different functions, with whether it's our garden, whether we're building a sidewalk, or whether we're building a building and we want concrete. The reality is that the ancients were no different. Why on earth is this building 8-sided? Unless it has to do with waves and frequencies and resonance. And there are a lot of things: communication, healing, like a giant hospital. Here is a similar view. So we're going to go Menkaure, and we're going to start here. So lots of dynastic work, and it's really fun to explore these sites for where they are now. There's lots of neat things to look at, but they're different than what they are and were when they were built. These constructions, the oldest, show polygonal construction. Menkaure here has 8 sides. You can see it better on your right side, but we are going to move. The Great Pyramid's actually not, it used to be called the Great Pyramid, and they're very close in size. But here's the Great Pyramid. And you can see the seam down on the right side also. It's just easier from this image. So we're looking again at an 8-sided building, and it's never stressed because people think it was either a mistake or it was just, something that just wasn't worth noting, that it was just a 4-sided structure. But if we're rebuilding a cymatic polygonal wave frequency generating society, we're dealing with something very different. And this is just 2 items. So here I started with, they had noted that, in quotes, Greco-Roman amphitheaters had pylon, which means the footings of the structure of the building themselves. Definitely canceled earthquakes. You can see in these pictures what they're doing is they're showing the stress points of what would happen from a local resonance from, per se, an earthquake, how it would affect this construction. This is new ground, folks. This is a report from 2019. This is multiple scientists and multiple work. This is exciting because you have to not see, this is so hard for everyone, don't look at the dynastic work. It's neat, it's interesting, but don't look at the dynastic work. Look at the construction of the ancients, the advanced ancients. You can see this has a whole different level of construction methodology than just people who are doing primitive construction. This is like the odds of this being random at this point. And again, what's missing? What are the other components of the foundation itself? What are the smallest properties of that foundation? Foundations are not sexy. They're not mummies. They're not Indiana Jones. It's not the Ark of the Covenant. Not as fun. So there are a number of places: Ollantaytambo, Sacsayhuaman, Pumapunku, Tiwanaku, Cusco, Egypt, Angkor Wat, megalithic Japan. There are the Temple of Delphi, Greeks, Roman, well, alleged Roman, but all over Italy, Malta, Sardinia, particularly Malta and Sardinia. Boy, again, this is above water still. Looking at these sites, I mean, what we're looking at in this particular case, I'll point out the very tall one that's towards the right, first row. That's approximately 700 or 800 tons. What a lot of people don't know is this particular structure allegedly has as much polygonal work underground or more. It's allegedly up to 40 feet deep of work, earthwork. This was attempted to be disassembled by the Spanish at one point, but they gave up, thank God, as some of these ancient sites were used by Catholic churches. And what we have are interconnecting locking blocks. Everyone's talked a lot about polygonal masonry. Well, here it is in some of its earliest photos. And the point of it is to, again, secure a structure on all sides so that it works together. And our first most I'm going to call it primitive. Our most primitive assessment is that this is because this is primitive, that they just, so the earliest idea of modern archaeology is, well, they went out and found blocks that sort of fit together, and then they just kind of worked with what they found, and then that's how they came up with this design. That works for a Victorian era, not woman allowing to vote, segregated society. That just doesn't work for anyone who's looking at this. You do not have to be a building expert to look at this and go, I don't think that's why they built this, the way they built this. But if you are very particular to the local resonance of local earthquakes, but you're also connected to an engineered soil like terra preta or some sort of other combination materials, is this what we're seeing above ground? A lot like what you see on Easter Island with the moai. I know we were talking about stone spheres, but Are we looking at the moai that are buried up to their neck, which, by the way, isn't really all of them? There's about 1,000 moai. The oldest are made of basalt. This ties into that whole dynastic people coming along and mimicking what they find. The oldest are made out of the hardest stones. There's about 150. They're the most well polished. The most ancient constructions on the site are polygonal and they're stone spheres. At least one, maybe more. We'd have to go find them, but that's not a burial. That's not gold. That's not a mummy. So it's not as fun to find. But here we are with a structure that may have 40 feet buried. And more importantly, we're like, oh, well, maybe the sedimentary built up. Well, that's possible. But what if it's also because the foundation of this structure is then below that? And the foundation of this structure could be more than a modern building. We're going to go over that here in just a little bit. How big would the structure be if it was just a construction of our time frame? Now, this is Machu Picchu. You see the nubs. And again, complex interlocking multi-ton blocks. This is how we found it. This is closer. I love the old black and whites, especially from a templated standpoint. It shows us the complexity of the construction. We're pausing on this because you're going to see some of the not so complex constructions. People, when you build, you stick with the same methods. You don't change your mind. Here is a close-up. There's a couple things that's interesting about this. One is we don't know how much of this is weathering and post Younger Dryas or pre-Younger Dryas, but post massive volcanic cataclysm of the 60 to 75,000 year range. Here's a polygonal block that lentils a window on the left into a corner block that has been shaped to fit the corner. That's a lot of work. Masons don't build like that today. And it's just important to note, it's the complexity of the construction. It's also where they got the block. I wanted you to see that because what you're looking at here is a corner again. This is in Egypt. This is not at Machu Picchu in Peru. Stone spheres all over the planet, engineered soil, in particularly terra preta on 3 continents that it shouldn't belong, right? And now megalithic construction that seems to keep getting brought up, but it never entirely gets brought up. And why on earth? Okay, so we don't know how to age stone. We have OSL, optical stimulus luminescence, and we have a carbon 14, carbon 13, carbon 15. We have a whole bunch of new methodologies to sort out how something looks, as far as age. But we really don't know how to age stone yet. And look at the melty and or really weathered rock. How much of this is natural? How much of that is intentional damage? But here we are looking at extreme antiquity. And right now we're looking at a lot of original construction. You can almost see at the top of the screen what looks like the remnants of window openings, but behind it is dirt. We make an assumption that there was dirt behind this, that in reality, behind this wall, that it was actually, that this was just a wall. Right now, it looks like it's attached to a hill. And again, those rectangular looking holes in the polygonal blocks, you're looking at a society that can easily shape blocks however they want. No mortar, can't fit a blade or a piece of paper or anything between these things. They're connected on every side. We get our first window to look at some reconstruction. It looks like polygonal work, but there was definitely reconstruction at these sites. And so now, how does this relate? Here we go. So you've come across what is the remnants of what could have been. We're assuming that, they can work with these large blocks, and then what? They don't know how to build a roof. They don't know how to create an A-framed or a vaulted ceiling with complex cutting of wood or metal or stone in other smaller ways, where what we're looking at, and again, at this point, you're looking at a building where it's allegedly up to 30 to 40 feet of buried work. this is a construction that could have been finished just like modern constructions. There's a lot of lofts and condos going up now. And if you look at them, the first 20 feet is retail resident, is like a retail or residential like common space, whether it's a gym or a party area or a big